I know we've got kind of a fluid group. People have been going in and out. So I'm the moderator for this is now our 4th annual Dewey to Digital session at this event. Before we begin, my background is in survey research. And again, I know we've got kind of a fluid audience, but in part to help this panel and others, let's do a quick poll. How many of you are affiliated with colleges or universities in an instructional role? You teach or you do instructional support for folks? Okay, how many of you are administrators in a college or university? How many of you are primarily affiliated with K-12 institutions or organizations? How many of you think there's gold in the world of higher education for technology, and you're here because you're doing market development or scouting? How many of you are doing that for K-12? How many of you are here for the free lunch? Okay. One little housekeeping announcement. I should tell you we are having a competition today. The person who comes up with the most new LinkedIn buddies at the end of the day will get a free drink when we do the social hour at the end of the day. Because we know you're all going to do LinkedIn by the end of the day, right? I'll pay for the drink. So this is our Dewey to Digital panel. My name is Casey Green with the Campus Computing Project. I'm going to do very quick introductions and then a little bit of context and this is geographic, it's not geopolitical. To my right and your left, first is Vineet Madan, who's Senior Vice President at McGraw-Hill. Next to Vineet is Matt McGinnis, who's a founder and CEO of Inkling. Sitting further to the right, of my right, your left, again, geographic, not political, is Joanne Spiker, who is Vice President for Sales and Higher Education at Copia. And at the far end, again, geographic, Cable Green, who is Director of Global Learning at the Creative Commons. I want to take a moment to set the stage for our conversation about moving from Dewey to digital. 2 years ago, when Walt Mossberg closed this conference, the last session, as he said earlier today, for those of you who were here, he was here, he saw a lot of tablets, made a comment, gee, a lot of tablets, period, paragraph, and textbooks ought to be digital and they ought to be a lot less expensive. Unbeknownst to Mr. Mossberg, 45 minutes earlier on the 2011 version of this panel, one of the panelists, Sean Ryan from CourseSmart, when I pressed him about the issue of why doesn't digital cost less, Sean said, in what I thought was an interesting moment of public candor, let's be clear with one another. By going to digital, the real savings are in printing, production, and shipping, not on content. In fact, when you do added value digital content, that could actually cost you more. You still have the core, if not greater, content development costs. So there's a lot of issues about should digital cost more, should it cost less, and how and why. Some other issues to set the context for our conversation. If I can get this to work. There we go. So some of you may know, this is Brian Kibbe, who's the president of McGraw-Hill Higher Education. In August, 5 months ago, Mr. Kibbe issued what we might call the Kibbe Challenge to publishers, certainly to the folks at McGraw-Hill, and to perhaps to the higher education community. Everything ought to be digital, and it ought to be digital in 3 years, essentially by August 2015. This was done in August 2012 in an article, opinion piece in Inside Higher Ed. This I would characterize as the digital moonshot in higher education. You could compare us in some ways in terms of aspirations to Kennedy saying in 1961, we will put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. The difference is that President Kennedy only had to worry about money and technology and not culture. Mr. Kibbe and the publishers and those of us in the higher education community have to worry about a culture that might be resistant to moving to digital. We'll talk about that with the panel today. If we look at some data about what students are doing and how students respond, we get some very mixed pictures. The first set of data come from Student Monitor. This is from a fall survey, 2012. Number of students who have purchased or rented and had some kind of ebook experience, 28% in four-year institutions, much higher, interestingly, in community colleges. For many of us, that might be counterintuitive. Thank you, John. Many said, again, in four-year versus two-year, requirement for an e-text was higher in two-year as opposed to four-year institutions. Satisfaction levels were surprisingly high, given some other stuff. 51% of the students in four-year institutions and 53% in two-year institutions reported that they were satisfied with the ebook experience. If I can bring up the next part of this. The next part of the graphic comes from a student survey sponsored by EDUCAUSE, the EDUCAUSE Center for Applied Research. What's important to students? E-reader platforms and tablets generally are not. The most important platform for them becomes their laptop. Go to the other part of the data from Student Monitor. Where are students reading? Many are reading e-texts on laptops. They're not reading them on tablets or e-readers. A lot of conversation about the price of e-books. I'm sorry, wrong sequence. Let's do this. Scanning the environment on e-books 2 years ago, I wrote in my digital tweet column, it's not yet compelling in terms of the added value for the content or for the price. In what is probably, to the best of my knowledge, the largest study of an e-book deployment involving Indiana University and a couple of other institutions released this summer. The title for the Chronicle of Higher Education was E-books Are Clumsy. And part of that article suggests it's like 1986 all over again. We have to train faculty about digital curricula. What kind of support do we have to provide students to make this work? We see lots of different data points that are in many ways conflicting, sometimes ambiguous, about the status of moving towards digital curricula. Finally, let's look at some price point data in terms of where, given that we know that students are very price sensitive, what does it really cost in different ways? This is a key microeconomics book used by tens of thousands of students across the United States. Frank and Bernanke. The Bernanke there is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, by the way. Notice that the list price for this, verified on a number of websites, is about $200. The new price goes anywhere from $110 through an Amazon Marketplace affiliate up to $153, but Amazon will sell you a used book for $100. The price to rent the book runs anywhere from $41 to $52. And the e-textbooks, which either for purchase or acquisition run anywhere from $81 to $128. The least expensive of each of these you see, and actually it turns out for this particular title, and these prices are fluid like airplane titles, because I looked at some of these numbers in December, some of the prices were different. As of this week when I did this exercise, like many students would do it at the beginning of the term, the least expensive option, what does it cost me to use this book for my course, turned out to be to rent it from Barnes & Noble. So with that, I want to turn to the panel to talk about going from Dewey to digital and issues of expectations. And Vineet, you're stuck because you work with McGraw-Hill. You share that kind of corporate affiliation. So let's begin by talking about the Kibbe challenge. Is that symbolic? Is it substantive? Is it realistic? In terms of that moonshot issue that's not about money and technology to make that work, but about changing a culture on the part of the providers as well as the users.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a great place to kick off the conversation, Casey. So, Brian and I and all the folks inside the company have had a lot of conversation about, so what does it take to be ready inside the company, and what does it take for the market to be ready to absorb and use more digital products and solutions? And I think it ends up being a bit of building a bridge from both sides, right? So from the perspective on the inside, we spent a lot of time, money, effort, and energy in trying to figure out, so what are better student experiences with content? We announced one suite of products a few days ago here at CES, our Learn Smart Advantage Smart Suite. So taking the textbook forwards, dynamic interactive labs forwards. So I think there's a lot of bridge building to be done from the content and application provider perspective out that can generate new value in the marketplace to get students to want to use digital content and experiences in different forms and fashions. I think there's another side of the bridge that's got to come back from the market perspective, as you've noted as well, from a cultural perspective, which is that educators and students have to want to try and use these types of experiences as well. So it's one thing to offer them. It's another thing to get people to want to adapt and adopt and use those things.
So Cable, you're kind of, given your background, you've been a faculty member, you work with community colleges, you're sort of our quasi-token academic on the panel today, even though you're currently with the Creative Commons, which is a nonprofit organization, correct?
Correct.
Is the bigger challenge technology, or is the bigger challenge culture to get to where Kibbe has said the world needs to go?
I think the biggest challenge is cultural. Certainly, big public institutions have a certain amount and a lot of inertia that they resist change. But we've also it's true. We also have significant policy challenges. Our policymakers in states and in the federal government fundamentally do not understand the 21st century technical and legal tools that we can wield today to fully take advantage of digital. So we know that once something is digital, we can make 1 million perfect copies of it for the marginal cost of zero. that first production might have cost $5–10 million to build a really great textbook and all the resources. But once that's built, you can share it. So governments around the world, including in the US right now, are starting to say when the public spends money on educational resources, that those resources should be openly licensed, because when the public pays for something, the public should have access to what they paid for.
And the payment, the statement about public payment is essentially based on student aid. That many students are getting student aid, so the extension, much like Title IX extends to anything the institution does, is the intellectual argument is because students get financial aid that involves government money, effectively it's a back-end subsidy to the publishers.
That's right.
I want to be clear about that.
That's right. In higher education, it comes through state financial aid and federal financial aid.
Although many would argue with that because it's a personal indebtedness, but that's the argument about why it's a public subsidy.
It is a personal indebtedness, but we're now past $1 trillion in personal debt, in student debt in this country. And so the question is, how much of that is textbooks? And the last panelist did a good job of laying out what are the problems with the prices of textbooks.
So Joanne and Matt, as folks, necessarily folks who take other people's content, because a lot of what you're doing is you're adding value in a digital format. Is the issue of technology, or is the issue one of culture as you look at this landscape? Joanne?
I think it's a combination of both. I think it's definitely technology, but it's culture as well. And I think we're going back to the issues of workflow, right? So the faculties and the outcomes for the student, you improve those outcomes and you improve faculty workflows, then I think you're going to create that tipping point, especially as educators and professors are including digital and requiring digital more as part of their course curriculum. But I think the technology is a combination of things. I think it's up to us to create the platforms, to create consistent ease of use and an experience that's bringing it all together so that students can find everything that they need in one particular place. I also think it's an issue for the hardware providers. As more people and more hardware providers are making the experience a whole lot better on their digital devices, we'll also see a tipping point to really embrace the technology that's available to them on a particular device. So I really think it's a combination of both culture and technology.
So Matt, Inkling does both consumer market content as well as campus market content. What's the carryover from one side to the other? I mean, the tagline has always been, you can get by with less sophisticated stuff for consumer markets, although Inkling is doing some very sophisticated added value with your consumer products. And the expectation on the campus market is these things don't work because there's not the added value.
So you framed the question between culture and technology, and actually there's a third piece to this that's missing, which is content. So when you
that
right. So when you go and build a textbook for print today, you're using all the technologies that were geared and honed over the last 20 to 25 years to build books. And that constrains you in a certain way. And if you take that stuff and copy it into a digital context, you get something that's a bit of a Frankenstein, because it's subject to all of the constraints of the book and subject to all of the constraints of whatever technology it's using, and you get a subset of the world of both. For me, what really has to change, and this is true of consumer content, and it's true of higher education and K-12, and any place where we're going to shift content from a print mode to a digital and interactive mode, is that you got to start from scratch. So you got to have the technology platform there to build an experience, and then somebody's actually got to use that technology to build the content that's going to sit there and be displayed to somebody. So this is a triple whammy, and culture, yes, is a hurdle, but the reality is that if we were cranking out awesome products every single day that could demonstrably change the way people learn, we'd get uptake in some of the early adopters in higher education. So I don't blame culture in higher ed nearly as much as I blame the fact that there simply aren't compelling products on the market today that do a better job to get people over the hump.
But there
I
are
definitely
people
agree that it's value. I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the value of the content or the value of the platform that really increases the user experience. And I think that's where the tipping point is going to come.
And part of that conversation, Joanne, I think is, are the students ready, or are the faculty ready, and are the applications up to the expectations of either or both?
I think it's actually a question of demographics, right, as we're talking about the future. I think students are ready, but I think the next wave of students are going to be far more ready than the current students, and they're going to demand that digital experience because that's what's native to them now.
I would argue differently, though, because the vast majority of students in the pipeline, well, they've got some digital experience, are still primarily using print rather than digital stuff in K-12 and higher.
Agreed.
In K-12.
Agreed. But let's realize one thing here. Again, we're going to go back and talk about value, right? So if you, like any consumer, if you leave it up to the consumer to make the choice, then they're always going to go for the cheapest, easiest option, and that's where
Cable
it's up
community
to us.
colleges, easiest, cheapest option.
No, I don't think so. I think that, again, let me come back to policymakers. So let me use an example that'll make this very clear. So I live in Washington State. I got 2 kids in public school. Our public schools, the textbooks are 7 to 10 years out of date. Why? Because they're really expensive. We've got to amortize the cost over 10 years. So my kids have 10-year-old textbooks. My state spends $130 million a year buying textbooks. So $130 a kid. So I look at that and I say, gosh, why don't we just call up McGraw-Hill and say, McGraw, we'll give you $1 million per book, because that's about how many books we have, about 100 books, right? We'll give you $1 million per book. You build us the best books. We're the government. We're not going to build jack, right? You're the publishing house. We'll give you the contract. You build the books, but the copyright stays with the state of Washington because they paid for it. The taxpayers paid for it. We'll give you the $130 million, and then we'll even give you an ongoing contract. And now all my kids have up-to-date books in 5 digital formats and print, right? We're not making smart policy decisions and licensing the works properly.
So you're talking about content as a service.
Yeah.
And Vineet,
Okay,
is that a conversation you're willing to have?
In fact, it's a conversation we're having, and we're selling on that model already in a number of states across the country. So it's a question of, when are the policymakers, legislators, in budgeting processes ready to move in that direction? We've got a product called Cinch, available in science and math, tablet-based, touch-based, and it is a curriculum as a service, right?
But that's a top-down model that works in K-12, because K-12 buys the turnkey stuff. Higher education has a culture where the faculty member has the prerogative. So if I don't want the McGraw book...
It's blended a little at the community college level, though. I mean, community colleges definitely look a lot more like K-12 than higher ed in many cases in their purchasing decisions. So
and that's 46% or 53% of enrollment.
Right. There's a spectrum, right?
We got an example of that, right? Again, in Washington State, where I worked in the community colleges there, we built something called the Open Course Library. And we did exactly what you said. We said, we're going to look at the entire general education curriculum. We build it all using open educational resources. Anything we built, we put a Creative Commons license on it. Then we worked with the publishers and we said, you know what? We're going to take advantage of the new technologies, the new licensing schemas, and textbooks in our highest enrolled classes don't cost more than $30 anymore. If you'd like to participate in that, we'd love to work with you. If you can't adjust your models like that, then stay out of our way because we're going to build new books. And that's exactly what we did.
Okay, and how's that? What's the faculty response to some of that?
The faculty, well, they're adopting it now. So in the first year...
Is that an adoption by affirmation or by edict?
No, by affirmation. There's no mandate to use it. You start to mandate open stuff, you go in the wrong direction.
All right. Other thought?
I think that there's we're also dancing around another question here, which I'd like to tee up, and I know you're the moderator, so you can kick me back in the pants here. Is that there's a question of what's return on investment of education? I think, Cable, you teed up the $1 trillion of student loan debt. I think it's kind of a little under that number now, but in any case, it's a lot of money gets spent, right? Education is one of the few trillion-dollar industries that exist in the United States still on every year. That's how much money gets spent across K-12 and higher education. So I think the conversation that's starting to be had, but I think there's a lot more to have, is so what's the return on that spend, right? So whether it's graduation rates out of high schools, college completion rates, job placement rates, right? How does the whole system work together?
But do you want to, as a publisher, do you want to be responsible for that?
Let me finish my point.
Okay,
right? So and I think it's what role can technology play in enabling better performance of that system, right? And so that's a question of, well, how do all of us as participants in that system take a look at, so what's our role in that value stream, and how do we provide new value to the market to make sure that we do get better outcomes out of that $1 trillion that gets spent every year?
But as a publisher, Vineet, and as essentially one of representing sort of the traditional Big Five publishers, it's one thing to provide really good content or the added value content that Copia provides or that Inklings provides. Do you want to be responsible for the completion rates in Washington community colleges based on the use of the McGraw-Hill widget book or the added value Inkling version of that McGraw-Hill title or the added value Copia version of that title?
Okay, I think what we've always been about is delivering high quality content in learning experiences that generate provable outcomes, right? So we've got adaptive learning tools, which I queued up earlier. We've got over 1 billion student interactions with these things, and we show over time, if students interact with these things in a high intensity fashion, you can get close to a full grade level improvement. So that's not a textbook that's being delivered. It's actually a software application that's personalizing learning, which takes everything that's been done in the past and builds on top of it, right? So I think you need high quality content and pedagogy as a basis, and then you can build and extend that as you get deeper in the value chain. Joanne mentioned, so kind of delivering new sources of value and getting into workflows. That's exactly what we've been looking at, is how do you get deeper in these workflows and generate better performance by doing that?
Matt, as I understand Inkling, you're all about value, sort of the added value in the platform.
We position ourselves to the higher education community as a source of really terrific interactive content. The reality is that we're a tech startup, right? And we're a company that builds a publishing platform that guys like McGraw-Hill, guys like Open Educational Resources can use to build interactive experiences as they see fit. Some do it better than others, and so you get some really amazing titles like Campbell Biology that blow you away with the level of engagement you can achieve in that content. And then there are others that are more or less facsimiles of a print book.
Essentially a PDF port.
Yeah, it's a port, although the great thing is that it's structured and that it's reflowable and works across iPhone, iPad, web, right? So, so we see ourselves as a platform. We're not the kingmakers. A company like us, you can't be the technology company and the content company and the sales and marketing company and the higher education. You can't do it. McGraw-Hill can't even do it, right? I mean, they develop technologies, but they can't be a tech startup and a content publishing company. And I think in the end, what we're going to see is Vineet and other companies like McGraw-Hill. I shouldn't say Vineet. Vineet's not McGraw-Hill. He is, but he's just one little part of it. Yeah. But companies like McGraw-Hill and Pearson are going to have to rely on external technology partners the way that Apple relies on external technology partners to build its products. They don't do everything either.
Cable, you look like you want to get into this.
Well, we're talking about return on investment, and I want to make sure that people know that what I'm talking about is not just they're not just silly ideas, right? 2 years ago, the U.S. Department of Labor said, here's $2 billion. They gave it to community colleges. But the caveat was, because you're building with public funds, you'll put a Creative Commons attribution license on everything you build. What does that mean? It means everybody in this room, every educator, every college university can use all $2 billion of content that's being built. California just said, you know what, the market is not working for us for textbooks. We're going to take $5 million of state money, public money. We're going to RFP for open textbooks. British Columbia, 3 weeks ago, said we're going to fund, with public money, 40 open textbooks. Brazil last week, the state of Sao Paulo, which is the biggest state in Brazil, 7th biggest city in the world, said all public monies that are spent on education will be openly licensed, and they're going to use a Creative Commons license as well. And Poland one final one. Poland said in K-12, because half their kids didn't have textbooks because they couldn't afford them, they're going to spend $14 million a year commissioning textbooks. The publishers will build them, but the copyright will be open.
Take 10 seconds to explain Creative Commons for those who may not be familiar with it.
So Creative Commons are, I have my one-liner here. Creative Commons is a nonprofit that enables the sharing and use of knowledge through free legal tools. So you keep your copyright, you put a Creative Commons license on whatever your thing is, could be a textbook. You're giving permissions to others to use your book for free under the conditions that you specify. You don't give up your ownership.
Not just your book, but anything in which you have copyright.
That's
so
right. Videos, art,
whatever. You stamp it with a certain Creative Commons license, and it can be shared by anyone.
So in one sense, it protects you potentially from inappropriate mashups or derivative works,
right,
but also allows you to, and is there any tracking? If I put something up for a Creative Commons through you folks, my widget book, do I have any sense? How do I find out where it's being used other than a Google search?
Yeah, so one of the things about Creative Commons licenses is they're machine readable, which this room will appreciate. So there's actually code in it. And if you go to Google, you can actually get metrics on where the stuff is. There's over 500 million Creative Commons licensed creative works out there today, and it's growing exponentially.
So Casey, there's a huge implication here. All right, so millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on open content, right? That is the commoditization and devaluation of content. So when you shipped a book from a warehouse to a user of that book, it was arguably worth $200 a copy. I can tell you it was worth $200 a copy because people pay it, right? And that's going away. So publishers like Pearson and McGraw-Hill and Wiley and Cengage and Norton and Macmillan, they all know that basically what they were in the business of doing, which was curating flat content, is going away. And it's going away in the name of free content, no content, YouTube, whatever, right? Stuff that just serves the purpose because it's good enough in some cases, and things that are beyond good enough are free. So what do you do if you're McGraw-Hill?
What do you do, Vineet?
I thought you were going to keep going with that.
I can answer the question.
Like, let me take a crack at it. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I mean, look,
wait,
one caveat to your model. The reason it's $200 for that widget book is because there's only one revenue turn, although there could be 4 or 5 user turns because of the used book market.
Sure.
And one of the attractions of digital is, in fact, you can bring down the price point because you make it multiple turns where people can't resell without anything going back to the publisher and the author.
Yeah, I think Ben Bernanke would say that because I think it's a high-level economic statement. I don't think it has any practical implications for for how the product is built. But I'll challenge that in detail in a second. I'll let you answer the question I just asked.
Yeah, thank you. So I think where we've been spending a lot of time, effort, money, and energy, and we, I guess, representing the publishers, is building very rich workflow-embedded learning applications and services. So we've got millions of students using our online homework tools. Those aren't textbooks. We've got over 1 million students using our adaptive learning tools, also not textbooks, right? And so on and so forth. We keep going on with these examples. So I think it's certainly innovating out of our history, but it has to be innovation that creates new value in terms of driving a better learning experience, right, or better teaching experience.
What percentage of the headcount, I don't know if you're allowed to disclose this, but ballpark, what percentage of the headcount at McGraw-Hill today is actually building textbooks, and what percentage is building technology?
So what I can tell you is that we've made a very concerted move to shift towards more and more software development and engineering and design and UI and UX and things that frankly didn't exist in the same way and fashion in the textbook world 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago are increasingly important today. And I imagine if you kind of scan through all the job postings we've got available, you'll find more and more types of job postings that you would end up posting, right? So because that's the type of world that we're competing in today.
If I could just jump in here for 1 second, because I think what I actually see is a world where it's a combination of these types of things, right? But I see huge limitations in terms of open source content, and I think one of them is actually, to the publisher's point, is vetting that content. That's what they have done for years. That's what people count on, is the rights and all of the materials and all of the images and all of the things that go in with that content. That's number one. Number two, I think in some terms of the limitations are keeping up with the technologies, keeping up with that value added, whether it's within the content, within the context of the textbook itself, the highlighting, the note-taking, the collaboration that is going on around the particular materials that are important to students today. So I'm not disagreeing with Cable's point at all, but I do see that there's a value in a combination of things. The other issue is that it makes it a little bit more difficult, right? So it's up to us to create the technologies and the value-added experiences for students that they want to come and enjoy the learning experience that's there. And if you create an environment where the faculty and the professors have to vet the materials, I think it just complicates the issue a whole lot more, especially when you're talking about some of these introductory classes, which is a large part of it, and adjuncts really need to rely on the publisher content.
Cable, I know you want to respond to that. I want to sort of frame that in 2 ways. One, if I sign a textbook contract with McGraw for my widget book, 1.0, 1E, I have signed an agreement in perpetuity, in essence, because McGraw isn't investing in my first edition, it's investing in green 1, 2, 3, 6, 20. And if I decide I don't want to do green widgets 20E, they will add Green and Jones, or Green and Smith, or Green and Wilson to carry on the franchise if it's worked. So that's one part, because the cycle, at least for all kinds of reasons, and we don't need to go into the argument about why it looks like a congressional race of every 2 years with new editions, it's been a 2 or 3 year churn, used books, content, whatever. Second, and it goes back to your agreement with my statement earlier, you want the Creative Commons to be essentially sort of open source, sort of content as a service. So you will pay. You said you would pay McGraw-Hill not only the $1 million up front, hypothetically, I don't know what's going on in the back room for that agreement, and a service fee as if it were a software licensing provider to keep doing those kinds of updates. And the thing that I hear about Creative Commons textbooks, not about content in general, is who does the updates and who does the servicing. So I think that extends to Joanne's points. Let me give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, so I would agree with Joanne. A lot of the OER that's out there that's produced by amateurs without all the publishing resources behind it is clearly not as good as what you get from a publisher. That's just fact. Now, there are also several big OER projects like OpenStax and CK12 textbooks where they're actually dumping huge amounts of money into those, and they are quite good quality. And Sea of Wool and South
OER, just for the record, is Open Educational Resources. Just get through the acronyms.
So I would agree with Joanne, and then say, look at what California's doing, right? So California has said, what we need for our highest enrolled courses are the very best textbooks. We don't want low quality, we want the best quality. And we want supplemental resources around it. But the existing market is not working. So the opening quote this morning from Walt was, he said the cost of higher education is neither moral nor sustainable. I would substitute textbooks in there. The current cost of textbooks is neither moral nor sustainable. And the path that we're about to go on with e-textbooks is almost worse, because we're going to have time bombs on those things. You're going to lose access. So what I'm talking about is for governments that have a vested interest in their citizens having access to educational resources in public schools, and they're currently spending $10 billion a year to do it in textbooks, that is crappy ROI. That's a terrible investment. And instead what government should do is they should step forward and say, we will put out an RFP, because you're absolutely right. Government's not going to build it, and amateurs aren't going to build the best stuff. McGraw and Pearson and Inkling and others are going to build the best content. What government should do is say, here's the RFP, right? Here's a whole boatload of money and an ongoing contract, but we own it. You can have a non-exclusive copyright as well, and we're going to put a Creative Commons attribution license on it. What does that mean? The only requirement is that you have to give credit. Now everybody can use it. So I'm sitting down in 2 weeks with 5 states and two Canadian provinces. We're essentially going to say, you do those 50 textbooks, you do those 30, et cetera. Everybody's going to release RFPs, and we're all going to require open licensing on it.
And
McGraw may build a lot of that.
Can you make a business out of that, essentially content as a service?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody wants to move their businesses. This is, if I had to predict where we're going to be 5 years from now, the vast majority of people who are not using a print textbook are going to be subscribing to a service. And they're going to subscribe to a learning service that's going to provide data about how the students are doing, and the students are going to be able to access information dynamically based on their own performance. And it's going to rely on a corpus of content that's served up on demand, and most of those objects should probably just be free, because you're not paying for the content, you're paying for the service. And so Inkling is a platform that will provide that service for McGraw-Hill or in competition to a publisher or whatever it is.
And Joanne, can Copia, as essentially an agnostic integrator of all these things, do content as a service?
We absolutely can do content as a service. I will say, though, that I think that the form of the digital evolution here is really in those interactive tools, the assessment and homework tools. I think that's really the direction that we're going. And again, you know, the publishers provide a lot of that information in terms of tests. And right, I mean, to Matt's point, yes, I mean, that's the beauty of the Copia platform, right? We can take the content, regardless of the source, if it's publisher, if it's access codes, if it's whatever, and pull that all into one experience. So we can provide that combination of open source or
Yeah,
publisher
I think a
provided.
careful thing that we need to make sure that we're all attentive to is that we're not doing the equivalent of saying, hey, look, there are all these resources available to students, basically the equivalent of sending them into the Library of Congress with using the Dewey Decimal System, right? And saying, hey, go find all your learning materials. Because you could say the web is a learning platform or portal. And to some extent, all the information that is available could be available. You can go find it all and learn on your own. I think that's a really, really hard way for students to learn. So I think there is a lot of time, effort, scholarship that goes into curation, management of those resources, assembly of those resources, and then building those into applications that help students learn better. And all that time, effort, and energy, frankly, takes a lot of time and money.
I want to take a different side of the learn better issue, because I think implicitly much of our conversation has been about tomes, big old-fashioned textbooks or print products. And yet the growing trend in parts of the market, McGraw is doing this, all the majors are doing this, is the adaptive learning applications. It came out of developmental ed. So the content is interactive, it's digital, there is feedback to the student, it's hierarchical, there's feedback to the faculty member, potentially it even has normative data, not only students in the Wednesday or the Friday classes, or the evening or the morning classes, but students at similar types of institutions. And there seems to be a different type of market equilibrium about pricing, because at the unit cost for individual students, they are less than that $200 or $150 tome in introductory economics or Algebra 2 as a pre-calculus course or something else. Does that change the conversation as well in terms of our conversation about added value?
I think students should we've been in this model for a long time of faculty adoption, student purchase. We're all familiar with it. And whether it's faculty adoption, student purchase, or faculty adoption, institutional license, student use, student charge rate. I mean, it's existed for a while. I think what we haven't fully explored in McGraw-Hill's, one of the folks who hasn't done this well, is getting students to want to use these things in different ways, shapes, and fashions, right? So it's not only your required materials, whatever they happen to be, required application materials, but what are the other things that can help you learn as a student? And then if there's enough value there, would you go out there and purchase them, right? So we've started to unbundle some of the things we've got available and make them available for direct student purchase. So even if your faculty member has not adopted it, you can go ahead. If it's going to help you learn, and we can prove, by the way, that it does, go ahead and buy it, right? If it doesn't, then you won't buy it.
Yeah.
Right, I think it is changing and shifting. I agree. I think that's where it's going, is to native digital, which is some of the things that we're talking about. But it is definitely the experience. So I think it's actually a combination where the faculty member, I mean, I think this is where we're really going to see the tipping point as well, is when the faculty members sort of require that this is how, this is the student's required course material, if you will. But it also includes the homework assessment. It includes, various types of information in that, so it all becomes very interactive. I think that's where you're going to really start to see the shift. And it does come down to value. Somehow it's always become this issue of cost, but I think as we're creating the experience for students where you have the collaboration, you have all of the other tools wrapped around it in terms of, the native digital, then I think you're going to see a lot more of this go in the way of digital, and the traditional, print replica of a textbook is going to start to fade away.
Yeah, and I'll agree with Matt's projection of 5 years out. So if we wake up in CES 2018, I think what we will see is more of these dynamic, interactive, personalized learning applications sold as a service to students.
Yes.
So if that's the case, this personalized, interactive, presumably lower cost, does this mean, I brought back the cost chart for my economics book. And Mossberg said 2 years ago, he said it again this morning, some of you have said the same thing as well, textbooks cost too much, digital should bring the price down, and yet we've got some evidence, at least through a random walk. Give me a moment, I'll give you yours. Random walk, that in fact digital doesn't necessarily bring the cost down that much given some of the other use options. Matt, I'm going to give you a chance first on this if you want it.
All right, so I'll always take it. New book, $200. You said to me that 4 people will use that book, effective, or 5, or
well,
whatever,
there'll be
right?
one first-time buyer,
Yep.
and there will be 4 or 5 turns on that before the next edition
All
is
right,
out.
so let's say a total.
And McGraw, in this case, this is a McGraw title, McGraw only has one revenue opportunity for all the development costs for that book, and there's none through the subsequent resales.
Right, so rental, any secondhand use,
Right.
McGraw-Hill sees no revenue. Not never, but usually not. So let's just for the sake of math say it's 4 users total, $50 a user. That's what's being paid for the use of this book. So you could, in theory, take a digital product and do it at $50 and sell it once a year.
Yeah.
I actually believe that the number is higher than 4, as you said, so you're getting prices that are much lower than that. And what we're going to see are these subscription systems where when you're guaranteed that every student in the class is going to pay their $20,
Right.
then the revenue to the publisher looks pretty good. Who loses? Somebody's got to lose in a transition where each individual student is paying less and the aggregate amount of money is less. Amazon loses because they're no longer a distributor. Chegg loses. Guys who are just doing print replica stuff like they lose. All these guys who are not innovating and are essentially just leeching revenue out of the value chain between the people who produce the content and the student who consumes it are going to go away, and the transaction is going to happen directly between the student and the entity providing the service. That's going to change the dynamic in favor of the student pretty dramatically.
Okay, before we go to the audience questions, I'll give you each a shot to follow Matt on the cost issue. So this is essentially a transitional moment, and 2 years from now, this is not going to be an issue. Cable, you're jumping to get in on this.
So 2 points. I can give you 3 micro-econ books right now that are all openly licensed where the cost is 0, 0, 0 on all 3. So that's point 1.
But Cable, that's not the book that's been assigned to me.
And they're not written by Ben Bernanke, but that's...
They're not written by Bernanke. Point 2, but they are being adopted and they're being used. Point 2 is look at the amount of money so we're not talking about $200. You're talking about $200 times the 100-person classroom. So in the system that I worked in, the highest enrolled course was English 101. Everybody takes it. 60,000 students a year. We're a small state, Washington State, 500,000 students in the community colleges. 60,000 students a book. The average cost of that book, $175, right? That's the average cost.
That's the average new cost of that book.
The average new cost of the highest 50.
Most students don't pay new.
More and more because of the turnover with revisions, but okay, we could argue that later. So one class, one book, one state, one system. How much are they spending? It's close to $10 million a year. $10 million. You know how much of that is state financial aid, direct state taxpayer money? About a third. You know how much is federal? Another third, right? So between state public money and federal public money, we're spending 2/3 of $10 million a year on one book for one student. Is that a good use of public money? Absolutely not, right? Joe Klein was talking about Common Core this morning and the opportunity around Common Core. The states, the 45 states and the 3 U.S. territories are queued up to spend $8.3 billion to update their curriculum and their textbooks to align with Common Core. What could we produce as these 45 states? I mean, how much money do we have to give McGraw-Hill to produce all the books, all the special materials, all the software, everything we need? Is it $8.3 billion? Probably not. I bet you they'd take $1 billion. And I bet you they do it, and I bet we don't.
You don't have to answer that in public.
That's a little hard to get into negotiation.
Because we are being filmed, so if you just want to say, let's talk later, that's okay. But if you want to respond to the general terms of that, Vineet.
Well, look, I think generally, I think it's funny because we keep looking at the textbook and textbook pricing as a reference point, but where we spent more and more time, effort, and energies on the software side of things. So building the homework
But I'm
tools,
talking
building
about
the
the software as
adaptive
well,
learning
right? I'm going to
system.
hire you to do both.
So as I'm saying, if that's where all the money is being spent, increasingly from where we're spending money, where the industry's spending money, I think we'll increasingly get towards the conversation of, so what's the price to value, right?
Okay.
And I think we'll be able to generate, in fact, we are generating better learning outcomes through the software-delivered learning systems than you could out of the print-based learning systems, right?
Joanne, you get the last comment on cost.
And that's fine, and I agree with Vineet's point again, and we've been talking about this all throughout the panel here, is that it really becomes an issue of value and the developing technologies and how we deliver and improve the outcomes to students. But I think what's interesting and what's going to happen is this cost structure and the model is going to change completely as we move and shift more towards that native digital, and you have less opportunity for rental and used. So I think you're going to really see the increase in value and the cost structure change.
Okay. We've tried to save some time for the audience. Some of you want to have at these folks. If Bobby Camille, are you running the mic?
I'm right here.
All right, let's have a hand for Bobby. She has been the mic runner, and she's also one part of the hidden infrastructure. And she was also married, still married, this last I heard,
So
to the last
I was
moderator.
this morning.
Yeah. Please, if you would, your name and your organizational affiliation. As I said to the other group, we want to make inappropriate inferences about your question as you ask it. That worked with the group this morning.
American of the American Polo Association. I'm a professor of computational neuroscience at the University of Texas Health Science Center associated with the Bar Shop Institute. Let me know when you want me to stop.
That's good.
I'm
Unless
also
you're looking for a job, but this isn't the place to do it.
Believe me, I'm not. I've got too many already.
All right.
So I'm also CEO of a company called Nemedian, which 14 years ago launched a website called Yville.net, which currently has 7.5 million children and was intended basically to put the textbook industry out of business. My question is this, okay? Universities are not innovators. It's going to take a while for them to shed the yoke. However, in K-8, the secret is the textbooks are not used now, and they haven't been used, but they've been sold. And it's a large amount of the market, and it's going to go away. Because it turns out that once you put these things online, like banner ads, it's easy to measure the fact that they're not being used. So my question is, what happens if the first time that textbooks are sold in the system, K-8, they're no longer being sold? What happens to the rest of the system and the use of textbooks?
That's a jump ball, unless that's directed to any one particular person. You want to pick on somebody?
You.
No. No, over here. Over here. Any of you want to respond to that?
Hey, look, I can start out.
All right.
So, look,
Thank
I
you,
mean,
Vineet.
McGraw-Hill has been in the education business for 125 odd years now, right? So, through that time, we've gone through many transitions. And by the way, unlike the earlier presenter, I can't claim to have been there for all 125 years. If so, I'm doing something remarkable on the genetic side, we should all talk about later. But we've gone through many transitions with all the constituents in the industry over that protracted period of time. And what we've always done is adapted what we do to serve new products and services to where the needs are in the market, right? So, if we come to a point in time where folks say, oh, that thing known as a textbook is no longer desired, that's fine. We're happy to move well past that. We've been preparing for that for a long time. Over 100%, well, 100% of the materials we've got available today are all available digitally, and they have been for a number of years now. So when folks are ready to move all the way over to the other side of this, to the bridge that we were talking about earlier, That's great. Let's do it. Let's move it quickly, and let's make sure that as we're doing so, and we've talked about value a few times, that we're doing it with value in mind so that we are pushing learning outcomes and learning performance forwards in a big way.
Anybody else?
Make one brief comment on that. Inkling is either the recommended or required platform for content at over 50% of US medical schools. And in those institutions, we provide a summary at the end of each semester of usage by book within that school. And it's really interesting because there are some schools based on their curriculum or whatever where we see just astronomical use of this content, and then other schools where we see nothing. We also do this for some of our K-12 schools. I might turn a report over to someone that says, your students aren't using the textbook, and what they don't say to me, oh, well, your product sucks and I don't want to buy it anymore. They say, oh, wow, this really powerful learning tool is not being used in the classroom, and they look for the root cause of the lack of engagement. So it's, you're absolutely right, whoever the guy was that asked the question, the CEO, professor, adjunct, neuroscientist, comedian.
Entrepreneur, you better add entrepreneur.
That data is going to change the nature of how people use this technology, and actually it's actually really cool what's happening right now, even for us.
Okay. And just for clarification, when you say how students are using, you're monitoring sort of time the book is activated?
We show people how much time is spent on the book, how many exhibit views occur, so how many different learning objects are they looking at over time, blah, blah, blah.
Great. Bobby, where are you?
Hi.
Our next question. Please,
Hi.
sir, you are?
Hi, James Hines from Co-working for Education. My question is to the gentleman from McGraw or anyone. He mentioned something that higher cost is attributed to digital books, and is it on the authoring side or is it on the delivery? Because delivery is like digital content's the Netflix model. You have a digital copy, you deliver. I'm trying to understand where you see the higher cost of digital books are.
I don't think I said that digital books were higher cost. If I did, I apologize.
I actually said that. And I said
Thank
that responding to what someone had said at this panel 2 years ago, that you potentially could incur higher costs because of the added value interactive content as opposed to a print title.
So we're talking about the authoring,
We're talking about the authoring and the added value of as
the
opposed to
licensing of other additional elements.
whatever it might be. But
Okay.
it's a content issue and potentially developing that content, not the distribution. Distribution.
You made a very important point there when you said licensing. So if you create the content from scratch as a digital product, it's a one-time cost that you can amortize across anybody who buys a license. That helps. If you license the content from someone else and pay out on a unit basis, then it drives up the unit cost of the product. So it's never simple. You have to think through where the media is coming from. When you license it from a commercial producer as a primary source reference as a part of the book, you're going to pay out so many cents per copy, and that's where digital stuff actually gets more expensive on a unit basis. But it probably still doesn't need to cost $200.
Yeah, and if you look at kind of what's happening with text and images and the types of new experiences you can deliver through screens, like many of us are carrying around in this room, and Matt's team has done a great job really innovating around that experience. You do have to license different content forms, right? So if you're doing a music appreciation class and you're just reading about it, well, that's great. It's a whole other thing to be able to listen to that music at the same time you're reading about it, but then you've got to get the right rights and everything else to do that, right? And integrate into a
Music appreciation is the worst because you have to license everything from Sony, so go talk to those guys.
No, but as you talk about where digital really has arrived in many cases is in medical and health sciences. So when you look at the simulation and all of the various things that go into producing that content, technologically speaking and licensing speaking, you do see a shift in cost.
So Cable, correct me if I'm wrong, but my guess would be that licensing portions for a Creative Commons widgets textbook, if it's a New Yorker cartoon, if it's somebody's interactive widget, if it's a photo that I found on the web or from Corbis, create some interesting challenges for a Creative Commons license as opposed to McGraw, which has got a team of people to go track that stuff down and do those payments. How does that play out?
Well, so the premise isn't quite right.
Okay.
If somebody holds the copyright to something like a New Yorker, comic or something, New Yorker owns the copyright. If you want to use that image, you have to contact them and get a license from them to use it, or they have to give you permission somehow, right? If they wanted everybody just to be able to use it and they want to see proliferation of they put a Creative Commons license on it, and then what they're doing is giving explicit, frictionless permission to use that thing.
In a particular context.
In a particular context, right.
Okay.
So with the terms that they put on the license. So this conversation about licensing is really what this public policy conversation is all about. So ask yourself, if your state or your nation is about to spend, pay licensing fees to McGraw or whoever else. And the question is, if you've got 1 million students, how much does the licensing fee cost for each student? Let's say it's $10. Okay, so you're going to spend $10 million a year, and they're going to charge you that every year. So then the question becomes, you're going to spend $10 million. What can you buy for $10 million?
So I create my own version of a New Yorker cartoon.
And I'm not saying that, so the government shouldn't build anything, right? All I'm saying is that policymakers need to be smarter with the huge amounts of public money that's going into educational resources. They should put out a competitive RFP that McGraw and Inkling and Copia and everybody else can reply to. But the government should say, here's what we need. The content, the software, the interaction, we want it updated, right? We want the best. And we'll pay for it, and we'll pay top dollar for it. But we're not going to pay for it over and over and over again at $10 million a year. We'll give you 10% maintenance or whatever it costs.
Yeah, this model works really well for the military.
That's
There's
right.
really awesome technology out there killing people.
And on that note,
Not the example I would use, but
There is, and there isn't that level of technology in our classrooms, and I would argue that the latter is a little more important.
All right, other questions? Who's got the mic? Bobby? Questions?
I'm sorry, I got on the wrong side. One last question.
So Alex Morrison with Discovery Education. I'm just curious, and I missed the early part of the session, so if you cover this,
Oh, you can't ask a question if you've done that.
OERs, any opinion on, we work less in the higher ed space than we do in K-12. What's your opinion on OER in the higher ed space from a digital side?
that directed the,
Anybody? OERs?
I think we kind of.
and we covered it, right?
I mean, I could say something if you want.
I think this is going to be a very quick answer, and then we'll take one last question. Say something on behalf of everybody that's fair and
Yes.
sort of.
Yeah, so real short, OER's been around a decade. It's open educational resources. Basically, people around the world are starting to say, I'm an educator, I'm building stuff with public monies, and I'm going to share what I build. Governments are starting to say, if you take our money, you're going to share what you build as a condition of the grant.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, we had a long conversation of OER about midway through. So I've got one last question. You, sir, get to ask the last question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a quick question. And how about the digital? Is it will affect the health for the students' eyes? If it will be a big challenge for the digital future? Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you ask that question again,
Is
please?
the question how it'll help the health of the reader and their
Yeah,
eyes?
yeah.
Okay.
Health is
Thank you.
compare the printed books. Yeah.
So the issue of fatigue, image, anything?
Well, I mean, I think that maybe a quick answer is if you walk the halls around here, you're seeing tremendous innovation in screen technologies, everything from the advances in e-ink to flexible displays to retina and retina equivalent displays coming out from more and more manufacturers. So I think if when we get to the point where you've got equivalent readability on a screen that can kind of change and update and provide rich text and animation without introducing the same level of eye strain as backlit displays normally do, I think then we'll have a great platform to deliver better experiences on that students can spend more time
Okay,
with.
panel, you get 10 seconds with this last question, then we're going to break. We have had a fast-paced conversation. We've had some audience questions. What haven't we touched on that we've missed in this conversation that before we go to the next group that ought to at least be raised as a missing issue?
Okay, I think maybe we can kind of go around the horn here. So I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is kind of the system of education that exists today. And so we've existed for a long time. Maybe this will tee up the conversation later about MOOCs in this industrial production model of education of one instructor to 30, 40 students, kind of broadcast out information. Students are assumed to absorb it all at the same time in the same rate in the same fashion, which I don't think is quite true, right? And so technology allows us to enable and embrace the differences in students' learning styles and performance and rates in a way that was never possible with traditional forms.
Matt, what have we missed?
I think I'll make an optimistic statement about 2013. This is the year that I think we're going to see new technologies actually roll out that enable some of the fundamental prerequisites of content composition and distribution to actually be built and released so that 1,000 flowers can bloom. We're going to do it. I know some other companies are going to do it, and it's going to be the first time that you can actually compose really great content. And the OER and all the Creative Commons content that people have been building, but it doesn't have a home, an aggregation point on the internet. That problem is probably going to start to be actually solved this year. And that's going to open up tons of new doors to how you then serve that content up in a dynamic fashion. So I'm pretty excited about this conversation next year because I think there's going to be huge strides forward in the next 12
So you're
months.
vying to get back here on the couch next year.
It's a nice couch.
It is.
if
I
you
couldn't
pay-
decide
we
if I
have
was
very
in
hard
therapy
tables.
or on
if you
Oprah.
pay me again.
We got to Joanne, what have we missed?
In my mind, I think there are, I don't know if we missed them, but I think there are two issues. And I think one of the things that Copia does and Copia provides to the education environment is pulling all of the pieces together that we've talked about into one interactive, outcome-based learning experience where we're pulling all of the various pieces of content together for delivery and workflows and ease of use for all of our students. The only other issue that I would think we sort of missed today would be issues of equality. And I think in higher education, you see a lot of that. It gets a lot of attention in terms of equality when you're talking about technology.
Good point. Cable, what have we missed? Quickly.
I'm going to go with Vineet. I think he's absolutely right. I think that that higher education is fundamentally is too entrenched in our ways. I think that we're arrogant and that we're unwilling to take the best content, the best software, the best resources that other people have built. So when I was working in the community colleges, our tagline was, we have to move culturally from not invented here to proudly borrowed from there. So if the best course is on Coursera and it was built by somebody else, I need to bring that into my classroom. If the best software is coming from McGraw-Hill for interactive learning design, or if it's coming from Carnegie Mellon's Open Learning Initiative, I need to bring that into my class. And my job as an educator is to be a synthesizer of all those solutions so that my students can learn.
Here, here.
Vineet, Cable, I think the only thing you said in that that's shocking is that many people here would be just shocked to think that higher education is arrogant. But anyhow, if you'll join me thanking the panel.